Have you ever felt imprisoned within your own mind? That persistent restlessness, that anxiety whispering fears and desires, holding you hostage to your own thoughts day and night? What if this mental prison wasn't built by chance, but by a fundamental force driving all existence? This is the starting point for our exploration of Arthur Schopenhauer's philosophy, a thinker who confronted human suffering with brutal honesty. Schopenhauer proposed that life is governed by something more fundamental than reason can easily grasp, not a divine entity or blind chance, but an inherent force in everything that exists. This cosmic energy is blind, irrational, and insatiable, an incessant craving to exist, to manifest, to want more and more without end. He called this force the will. This will is not our everyday conscious will that decides what we'll eat for breakfast or which show to watch. It's something infinitely greater, the will with a capital W, the intimate essence of the world and hidden engine behind all phenomena. It's the force that makes seeds sprout through hard soil, drives animals to hunt and reproduce, and in humans, translates into an endless stream of desires, longings, passions, fears, and hopes. This will is the thing in itself, pulsating in every atom of the universe and most intensely within each of us. It is precisely in this epicenter of incessant wanting that our anxiety takes root. The will, by its intrinsic nature, is insatiable. It knows no rest, no lasting contentment. When it momentarily achieves what it wants, it immediately turns to a new object of desire. If it fails to achieve what it craves, which is usually the case, it suffers from absence, lack, and frustration. There is no endpoint for the will, no state of permanent satisfaction, no safe harbor where it can finally rest. It's like a fire that constantly needs fuel to keep burning voraciously, and we, with our capacity to feel and desire, are that fuel. All our desires, for professional recognition, romantic love, financial security, material goods, even spiritual enlightenment, are manifestations of this primordial will operating through us. Haven't you noticed how often, after achieving something you ardently desired, the satisfaction is painfully ephemeral? Soon, almost immediately, a new emptiness appears, a new restlessness, a new craving. That dream job, once attained, reveals its own pressures and responsibilities, bringing new fears of not being good enough, of losing what was gained. That long-awaited relationship, once established, reveals its own complexities and frictions. This is the relentless dynamic of the will. It constantly projects us toward the future, toward what we don't yet have, generating chronic internal tension. When this expectation confronts an imperfect reality, it turns into frustration, disillusionment, or boredom. Schopenhauer stated that human life oscillates like a pendulum between pain and boredom, the pain of unsatisfied will and the oppressive emptiness when desire momentarily subsides. Anxiety is the soundtrack to this perpetual oscillation, the constant fear of future pain, the restlessness gnawing at the present, the shadow of boredom that haunts us. Do you recognize yourself in this endless cycle? In this incessant pursuit with no final destination of genuine contentment? If so, you are not alone. This is the universal human condition according to Schopenhauer. It's not a personal flaw that needs fixing with positive thinking or more effort. It's the manifestation of the cosmic will in your individual consciousness. To be a prisoner of your mind means to be a prisoner of this will operating through your thoughts, generating a continuous flow of worries, obsessive planning, ruminations about the past, and fearful projections about the future. Your mind becomes the stage where the will enacts its endless dramas, and you are both the main actor and the anguished spectator. It may seem a profoundly pessimistic view, and indeed, Schopenhauer is often labeled as the quintessential philosopher of pessimism. But there's a paradoxical liberation in facing this brutal truth. By understanding that anxiety is not merely an individual psychological dysfunction, but a fundamental characteristic of existence driven by the will. You can begin to relate to it differently, not as an enemy to be annihilated at all costs, but as a messenger of something deeper and universal. Schopenhauer doesn't leave us completely adrift in this stormy ocean of will and suffering. He points to some safe harbors, some oases of tranquility, where the blind and tyrannical impetus of the will can be momentarily suspended. One such harbor is aesthetic contemplation, the profound experience of art. When we lose ourselves in the beauty of a symphony, a painting, or a poem, for a magical instant, we transcend our desiring ego. We cease to be subjects driven by the will and become pure contemplation, free from the will's yoke. In that moment, we want nothing from the artwork for ourselves. We simply contemplate its intrinsic beauty, and this provides indescribable relief, a peace that is the temporary absence of that tireless engine within us. Think of the last time a song completely enraptured you, or a landscape left you breathless. In that instant, anxiety simply dissipated. This is the power of art as a quieter of the will. Another path with significant ethical implications is compassion. For Schopenhauer, compassion, Mitleid in German, literally to suffer with, arises from the intuitive recognition that another's suffering is essentially the same as our own. When we feel another's pain as if it were our own, we break through the illusory barriers of egoism, the will asserting itself in us in an individualistic way. In compassion, the will in me recognizes itself in the other, and this universal identification alleviates the weight of our individual burden. By genuinely caring about others' suffering, we transcend our small, hungry, personal will. Anxiety, often egocentrically focused on our own fears, can significantly diminish when our focus expands to include others' well-being, a profound paradox. By feeling the world's pain, our own individual pain becomes less oppressive. The most radical path, deeply inspired by Eastern philosophies like Buddhism and Hinduism, is the denial of the will, asceticism. It's a conscious, disciplined effort to quiet desires, to renounce satisfactions that the will seeks, to cut the roots of wanting. It's a kind of voluntary death in life, where the individual, understanding the illusory and suffering nature of existence, decides to no longer participate in this painful game. This doesn't necessarily mean retreating to a monastery, but rather a deep inner detachment, a serene indifference to the will's whims, an active refusal to feed its fires with new desires. This arduous path points to the idea that our greatest freedom is not in satisfying all desires, which is impossible, but in freeing ourselves from the tyranny of desiring itself. How does all this apply practically to our daily anxiety? If the will is the master root, and anxiety one of its bitterest fruits, then understanding this fundamental dynamic is already a crucial step, a first glimpse of light in the darkness. Your anxiety, that inner voice telling you that you're not good enough, that something terrible is about to happen, that you desperately need something to be happy, is the will's megaphone. It uses your thoughts, painful memories, and catastrophic projections to keep itself active, to keep you engaged in incessant search and paralyzing worry. The prison of the mind is the arena where the will holds us captive through repetitive thought patterns and inner narratives reinforcing fear and desire. But here's a powerful turning point. You are not your will. You are not your desires or fears. You are the consciousness that can observe this will in action. Just as in aesthetic contemplation, we become pure I that contemplates. We can learn to observe our anxious thoughts without completely identifying with them. We can recognize with inner distance, there's the will again, with its old tricks, trying to convince me that my peace depends on this or that. This observation doesn't eliminate the will, but it creates a space between blind impulse and automatic reaction, a space where anxiety can be felt and recognized, but not necessarily blindly obeyed. This Schopenhauerian perspective doesn't promise a miraculous cure for anxiety or perpetual happiness. What it offers is something perhaps more valuable: understanding. And with understanding comes a form of peace that doesn't depend on the absence of problems, but on our ability to relate to them in a wiser, more conscious way. If life is fundamentally suffering punctuated by moments of boredom, perhaps our noblest task is not to try escaping this human condition at all costs, which only generates more frustration and anxiety, but to learn navigating it with more equanimity, with compassion for ourselves and others, and with appreciation for the rare moments of beauty, connection, and transcendence that life still offers. Think about it. If you're in a physical prison and spend all your time desperately fighting against the bars, your experience will be pure torment. But if, by accepting the reality of the prison, you begin to observe its patterns, to find small forms of freedom within its limits, perhaps reading a book that transports you elsewhere, having a meaningful conversation with another prisoner, finding beauty in a ray of sunlight through the cell window, your experience, though still within prison, can be radically transformed. The mental prison of anxiety functions analogously. The desperate struggle against it only tightens its chains. Conscious observation and understanding of its deep origins may not give you the key to absolute freedom, but it can make your inner cell more spacious, less dark, more habitable. The unique beauty of Schopenhauer's philosophy, despite its apparent pessimism, lies in its relentless honesty and refusal to offer easy consolations. He doesn't treat us with condescension but looks us in the eye and says bluntly, yes, life is inherently difficult. Yes, suffering is intrinsic to conscious existence. Yes, there is an insatiable force within you that will never be completely satisfied. And paradoxically, there's a great relief in hearing this naked truth. It frees us from the cultural tyranny of should be happy all the time and allows us to accept our full humanity, with all its contradictory desires, irrational fears, and persistent anxieties. It's not about passively resigning oneself to suffering or drowning in pessimism. It's about a radical shift in the focus of our vital energy. Instead of trying to satisfy an insatiable will, as futile as filling a leaky bucket, we can direct that energy toward cultivating awareness, detached observation, genuine compassion and appreciation for ephemeral beauty in art and nature. We can learn to identify when the will screams loudest within us, generating sharp waves of anxiety, and instead of being swept away, take a step back and observe it, like watching a violent storm knowing that eventually it will pass. This is the relative freedom we can aspire to, not the complete eradication of the will, which would mean death itself, but a more conscious, skillful dance with it, a dance where we are not always blindly led by its impulses, but where, at times, through consciousness, we can choose our own steps, even if the background music continues to be the bittersweet melody of existence. Anxiety then becomes not just a shapeless monster to be feared and fought, but a signpost, an uncomfortable reminder of our connection with this vital force that, although problematic and the source of suffering, is also the source of all life's intensity and dynamism. Perhaps the real question is not how to eliminate anxiety forever, but how to live a meaningful life despite anxiety, despite the insatiable nature of the will. Schopenhauer invites us to look beyond superficial solutions, beyond the incessant search for happiness, always one step ahead, and to find wisdom and serenity in the recognition and acceptance of our shared human condition, a condition of desiring beings in a world that rarely perfectly corresponds to our deepest longings. As we conclude our reflection, the image of the mental prison transforms. Perhaps the key is not to dream of an impossible escape or the total destruction of the prison, but to understand its complex architecture and find a paradoxical freedom within it. A freedom born not from the absence of chains, but from the awareness of them, from the compassion this awareness awakens, and from the beauty we can still find even in the darkest corridors of our existence. A freedom that blossoms when we stop fighting against the fundamental nature of life and begin to seek understanding, acceptance, and perhaps a glimpse of transcendence. If this journey through Schopenhauer's challenging thought resonated with you, if it brought some clarity, some unexpected comfort, or perhaps a new question that will move you forward, know that we are together in the search for a deeper understanding of ourselves and of the complex, sometimes painful, but always fascinating beauty of simply being.